The lobby smelled like wet wool and burnt coffee, and every single chair was full. I stood at the front desk with snow melting down the back of my collar, watching a woman in a Christmas sweater cry quietly into her phone about a canceled flight, and I thought, this is fine. This is a completely normal Tuesday. I am a senior brand producer at one of the fastest-growing agencies in Chicago. I have flown across the country to save a 7-figure pitch, and I am absolutely fine. Rhea Montgomery, party of 2. The receptionist, a young man with a name tag that said DEV, and the wide, glassy eyes of someone who had already fielded 40 complaints that hour, typed something, frowned, typed it again. I'm so sorry. The system rebooked half the hotel during the storm reroute. We have you confirmed for a room. Just one room. One room, I repeated, in the tone I usually reserved for clients who wanted the logo bigger. For 2 people, Dev said, wincing like he could already see how this was going to go. It's our nicest available suite, so that's something. Beside me, Rhea Montgomery did not react at all, which was somehow worse than if she'd laughed. She had her coat still buttoned, her hair damp at the temples, and that particular stillness she got right before she destroyed someone in a client meeting. 2 years of watching Rhea Montgomery across conference tables had taught me that her silences were never empty. They were loaded. Define sweet, she said finally, low and amused, like she already knew the punchline and was waiting for the rest of us to catch up. 1 king bed, Dev said. Very nice soaking tub. Lake view, if the storm ever lets you see the lake. I felt the words land somewhere behind my sternum. 1 bed. There is a pull-out chair, Dev offered, so gently that I almost forgave him for everything. We could call around, I said. There has to be another hotel. In this? Rhea nodded toward the windows, where the snow was coming down so hard the parking lot lights looked like they were underwater. Cassidy, it's a bed. We've survived worse. I believe you called my Q3 deck derivative in front of the entire executive team. It was derivative. She laughed, short and surprised, like I'd gotten one past her, and something in my chest did an unhelpful little lurch that I chose to attribute to 6 hours of delayed flights instead of caffeine. Rhea Montgomery had a laugh she almost never let out at the office, guarded the way she guarded everything, and I had spent 2 years being furious that I noticed when it happened. I really do only have the 1 key pair left, Dev said, with the desperation of a man who had already lost the room 3 separate times to shouting business travelers. I can send up extra pillows and blankets. People co-sleep with strangers on airplanes for less legroom than this. We're not strangers, I said. We're coworkers who compete over everything, which is worse. Careful, Rhea said. You're going to make him think we don't like each other. In the end, there was no other option, and we both knew it, and I think some small, dishonest part of me had known it since the moment Dev said. 1 room. And Rhea hadn't so much as blinked. I signed for the key. Rhea took her suitcase handle in one gloved hand and looked at me with the particular patience of a woman who had all night to enjoy watching me spiral. You've gone very quiet, she said as we crossed the lobby toward the elevators, our shoes leaving dark prints on the marble. I'm thinking about the bed. About the account, I lied. She hit the elevator button like she was scoring a point. You're thinking about the bed. The elevator doors opened onto our floor with a soft chime, and the hallway beyond was hushed and gold-lit, storm quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel too intimate. My keycard sliding through the lock, the click of the mechanism, the door swinging into a room that was, infuriatingly, gorgeous. Floor-to-ceiling windows blurred white with snow, a gas fireplace already flickering, someone's idea of a welcome gift. And in the middle of it all, entirely too large for a room meant for 2 professionals who argued about everything, 1 enormous king bed with a white duvet turned down at the corner like an invitation. Rhea set her suitcase down at the foot of the bed, straightened, and looked at it the way she looked at a media plan she was deciding whether to approve. Then she looked at me. Unless you're nervous, she said. I have replayed that sentence more times than I will ever admit to another living person. 4 words, delivered with the exact careless confidence she used to close every pitch she'd ever walked into. Not a question. A door held open, daring me to decide whether I wanted to walk through it or spend the whole night proving I didn't. "I'm not nervous," I said, which was technically a lie by omission, because I wasn't nervous about the bed. I was nervous about how much I suddenly wanted to know what Rhea Montgomery looked like asleep. Before we return to the story, a quick note for my lovely viewers. While this YouTube series keeps things safe, my Patreon is where the real fun happens. That's where you'll find completely uncensored GL stories, much hotter exclusive videos, and bolder adventures that are just too spicy for YouTube. If you want the full, no-limits experience, and to support more of this kind of storytelling, the Patreon link is in the description below. Good. She was already unzipping her suitcase, brisk and businesslike, like she hadn't just detonated something in the middle of the room and walked away from the blast radius without a scratch. "Because I don't do the chair, and I refuse to be the reason you throw out your back the night before we pitch Helen across. I could sleep on the floor." "You could," she agreed. "You could also stop being dramatic and take the side by the window, since I know you like to see the exits." "How do you know that?" "Cassidy." She said my name like she was fond of it, which she absolutely was not allowed to be, given that 6 hours ago she had told a room full of executives that my color palette read like a hospital waiting room. "I've shared a conference room with you for 2 years. I know you check the exits. I know you take your coffee with 1 sugar, even though you tell the barista none, because you think wanting sugar makes you look soft. I know you hum when you're editing, and you have no idea you do it." I didn't know what to do with any of that, so I did what I always did with Rhea Montgomery when she got too close to something true. I deflected. "That's not fair," I said. "You've clearly been taking notes on me like a rival spy." "I prefer competitive intelligence," she said, and unzipped a garment bag with the particular efficiency of a woman who had learned long ago that being good at her job was armor against everyone deciding what else she might be. "Also, you called me derivative in front of Miles. I think we're even on invasions of privacy." We unpacked in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable and wasn't quite hostile. Some third thing I didn't have a name for yet. I hung my pitch clothes with more care than they deserved, just to have something to do with my hands. Rhea moved around the suite like she owned it, pulling the curtains tighter against the storm, checking the thermostat, setting her phone to charge on the side of the bed nearest the door. The side, I noted, that put her between me and anyone who might come through it, which felt like exactly the kind of thing she'd deny doing on purpose. "Rules," I said, because if I didn't impose order on this room, I was fairly sure I was going to lose my mind. "If we're doing this," Rhea arched an eyebrow, delighted. "You want rules for sleeping. I want rules for sharing a bed with my professional rival the night before the biggest pitch of the quarter, yes." "Fine." She sat on the edge of the mattress, unlacing her boots, and somehow made even that look like a negotiation she was winning. "State your terms." "Pillow wall." "Absolutely not. This is not a divorce." "Fine. No pillow wall. But, invisible line, down the middle. You don't cross it." "I would never," she said, with the exact tone of someone who absolutely would, eventually, on accident, in her sleep, and we both knew it. "No talking after midnight." "You talk in your sleep, though." "I've heard you do it on the plane." "I do not." "You called someone named Daphne a menace and then laughed at your own joke." "That," I said, with as much dignity as I could gather, "is accurate, actually, and not the point." "No talking after midnight," Rhea repeated, holding up one hand like she was being sworn in. "Anything else, counselor?" "Blankets are shared property. No hoarding." "I would never hoard a blanket." "I would, however, note that you run cold, historically, in every meeting room I have ever been trapped in with you, and I intend to plan accordingly." "One more," I said. "If either of us starts talking in our sleep about work, the other person is legally required to never bring it up again." "That one I can't promise," Rhea said. "If you say something incriminating about the Hensley account in your sleep, I reserve every right to use it against you in the next status meeting. That's not how rules work." "It's exactly how my rules work," she said, entirely too pleased with herself, and I didn't have a response to that, because it was true, and because the way she said it made the whole ridiculous negotiation feel less like a truce and more like something we were both, quietly, enjoying. I didn't have a response to that, because it was true, and because the way she said, historically, made it sound like she'd been keeping a file on me, the way I'd been keeping one on her, and the thought of that, the thought of 2 years of rivalry actually being 2 years of paying attention, sat strangely warm in my chest. The lights flickered once, then went fully out, and the room dropped into the soft orange breathing of the gas fireplace and nothing else. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened. A man swore. A child laughed at the sudden dark, like it was the best part of the trip. Rhea didn't move from the edge of the bed. Neither did I. "Storm," she said, unnecessary and quiet. "Storm," I agreed. Without the overhead lights, without the hum of the vents, the suite felt smaller and much more honest. I could see her properly for maybe the first time all day. Not Rhea Montgomery, strategy director, undefeated in pitch rooms, terror of junior account managers, but a woman sitting barefoot on a hotel bed with her hair coming loose from its clip, tired in a way she never let the office see. She'd taken her earrings out at some point without my noticing. Her makeup had faded at the edges from 12 hours of travel. She looked, for once, exactly her age, and human, and unguarded. And it did something to me that 2 years of watching her win arguments never had. "You're staring," she said, without looking over. "You look different without the—" I gestured vaguely at the space around her. "The office version of you. That's the idea." She drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, watched the fire instead of me. "Nobody gets the other version. It's inefficient." "Efficient for who?" "Everyone who'd use it against me if they got the chance." She said it lightly, like a fact about the weather. But there was an edge under it that made me want to ask more, and no, I wasn't allowed to yet. We didn't talk much after that. The power came back an hour later in a soft electrical sigh, and by then we'd already negotiated a truce made of blankets and silence and the invisible line down the middle of the mattress, and I fell asleep faster than I expected to, aware the entire time of the warmth of her a foot away, the sound of her breathing settling into something slow and even, and the strange, dangerous comfort of not being alone in a storm for the first time in longer than I wanted to admit. Morning came in gray light, and the smell of the coffee Rhea had somehow already ordered up from room service before I was fully conscious. "You take it with 1 sugar," she said, holding out a cup without looking up from her phone, where she was already reading the storm advisory with the flat focus of someone assembling a battle plan. "Don't argue with me. I watched you drink hotel coffee black once, and you made a face like you'd been personally betrayed." I took the coffee. I did not argue. This felt, dimly, like a loss. We made it downstairs to the restaurant by 8, hair still slightly damp, dressed for a pitch that suddenly felt very far away, given that half the printed materials were sitting in a lost suitcase somewhere between O'Hare and here. Miles Harrington had beaten us there, gray-faced and jittery with airport coffee, already on his second call of the morning. "Tell me you have the boards," he said, the second we sat down. "We have the boards," Rhea said, calm in the specific way she got when everything was, in fact, on fire. "Digitally. We'll present off the tablets if the print materials don't make it. And honestly, the tablets are cleaner. Cassidy redesigned the transitions last week." I glanced at her. She hadn't needed to say that. She could have let Miles believe the save was entirely hers, the way I half expected her to, and instead, she'd handed the credit sideways without even looking at me, like it cost her nothing. "Fine," Miles said, already standing. "Helena wants breakfast in 20. She's testy. The competing agency's already been in her ear about our travel reliability." "Whatever that means." "It means Vanessa Crane is here," Rhea said, and something in her jaw tightened, just slightly, just enough that I noticed, because noticing Rhea Montgomery had apparently become my new full-time occupation. She does this: charm the client, undercut the competition, smile the whole time. "You know her?" "We were at the same agency, years ago." Rhea's voice went carefully neutral, the tone she used when a topic was closed for business. "Let's just say I know what she's capable of and leave it there." Breakfast with Helena Cross was its own kind of storm. She was sharp-eyed and unimpressed. The kind of client who tested people not because she enjoyed cruelty, but because she'd built a hospitality empire on the theory that anyone who couldn't perform under pressure couldn't be trusted with her name. She ordered black coffee and dry toast and watched us over the rim of her cup like she was pricing us. "I heard your reservation was a disaster," she said. Not quite a question. "Lost materials, one room between the two of you. I'm told the storm nearly canceled the whole event." "It did make for an eventful arrival," Rhea said, perfectly composed. "And yet here you both are. Presentable. Prepared. Not screaming at each other in my lobby, which is more than I can say for the last agency I worked with during a crisis." Helena set down her cup with a precise click of china against saucer. "I find that useful information, actually. Anyone can perform when things go well. I care much more about what happens when they don't." She asked Rhea a pointed question about positioning, and Rhea answered it without hesitation, elegant and exact, and then, this was the part that stayed with me, she turned to me mid-sentence and said, "Cassidy's the one who found the emotional core of this, though. I can build a strategy around anything. She's the reason it'll actually make someone feel something." And Helena Cross looked at me like she was reconsidering an opinion she'd already half-formed, and I felt something in my chest crack open just slightly, in a way that had nothing to do with the pitch at all. Across the room, at a table with two junior associates who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else, Vanessa Crane watched us with the pleasant, patient expression of a woman who collected other people's weaknesses the way some people collected art. We spent the day in a glass-walled conference room that looked out over a lake gone the color of pewter under the storm, rebuilding half our materials from memory and shared panic. And somewhere in the third hour of it, elbow to elbow at a laptop, our hands brushed reaching for the same trackpad, and neither of us moved away as fast as professionalism required. "You're doing the thing," Rhea said. "What thing?" "The thing where you go quiet and start chewing on the end of your pen because you think a headline is wrong, but you don't want to fight about it in front of Miles. I don't do that." "You've done it 4 times today." She reached over, gently, and pulled the pen out of my mouth before I'd even registered I was doing it, setting it down on the table between us like evidence. "Just fight with me. I like it better than the silence." "You like fighting with me?" "I like knowing where I stand with you," she said, quieter than I expected, and didn't elaborate, and went back to the deck like she hadn't just handed me something soft and dangerous to carry around for the rest of the afternoon. Around noon, when the printer jammed for the 3rd time, and Miles started pacing the hallway making a phone call that involved the word unacceptable. 4 separate times, Rhea stood up, closed her laptop, and said, "We're leaving. We have a pitch in 2 days. We have a pitch in 2 days. That will go worse if you keep chewing on that pen, and I keep pretending I'm not watching you do it. Get your coat." There was a cafe a 1/4 mile down the plowed road into the small town that had grown up around the resort, low-ceilinged and warm, strung with the kind of lights that stayed up year-round out of pure stubbornness. The owner, an older woman with flour on her sleeves, took one look at us. Damp coats, exhausted eyes, the particular hunted look of 2 people who had been arguing about a headline for 6 hours, and brought us coffee before we'd even ordered it. "This is nice," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the mug, watching the snow fall soft and unhurried outside the window, instead of sideways and furious, the way it had been falling for 2 days. I forgot rooms could feel like this. Like what? Like nobody's about to ask me to defend a font choice. Rhea smiled into her own cup, and for a while, neither of us said anything, and it was the first comfortable silence we'd had in 2 years of always needing to fill the air between us with argument. It was Rhea who broke it, eventually, careful in a way she rarely was. "You went somewhere, back at breakfast, when Helena asked about our process. You do that sometimes, somewhere behind your eyes." I turned my mug a slow half-circle on the table. "There was someone, at my last agency, a creative director. We were together for a year, secretly, because the agency had a policy, and then it ended badly, and he made sure everyone knew whose fault that was before I even had a chance to tell my own version of it. I spent the last 6 months there being the woman who'd slept her way into good projects, even though I'd built half of them myself. I left before they could formally push me out. Cassidy. I made a rule after that, no one from work, ever again. It felt like the only way to keep what I'd built from being taken away from me by someone else's version of events. I looked up. So you should probably know that's what you're up against. Not just the rivalry. That too. Rhea was quiet for a long moment, turning something over. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. No performance in it at all. I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what that cost you to say, but I'm not him. And if this, whatever this is, ever becomes something, I would burn the account down before I let anyone make you small for it. That's a very dramatic promise for a woman who once told me my color palette read like a hospital waiting room. I contain multitudes, she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted, and something in me loosened that had been clenched tight since the moment Dev said. One room. 2 nights ago, back when a single hotel bed had felt like the biggest problem either of us was going to face on this trip. We walked back to the resort slower than we needed to, our shoulders bumping now and then, in a way that felt less like accident with every block. The trouble found me alone, an hour later, near the coat check outside the conference wing, where Vanessa Crane was waiting with the patient timing of a woman who'd clearly been watching for the moment Rhea stepped away. You've got everyone fooled, Vanessa said pleasantly, adjusting her gloves. Rhea Montgomery, defending your ideas, smoothing things over with the client on your behalf. It's sweet. I just wonder if you ever think about what happens to your reputation once people start whispering that you only win because she carries you. I don't think about it, I said, because it isn't true, and because I don't organize my life around what people like you might whisper. Confidence. I admire that. And Vanessa's smile didn't move. I had a rival like her once too. Very protective, very convincing, right up until the account mattered more to her than I did. She walked away before I could answer, and I stood there with my coat half-buttoned, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature, until Rhea found me 10 minutes later and read the whole thing off my face before I said a word. What did she say to you? Nothing worth repeating. Cassidy, I told her, eventually, in the elevator lobby, and I watched something go very still and very cold behind Rhea's eyes, a version of her I hadn't seen before. Not the smirk, not the armor, something quieter and far more dangerous. She's wrong, Rhea said, about all of it, and I am going to enjoy beating her fair and square more than I've enjoyed almost anything in my professional life. I found out, later that afternoon, secondhand from Miles, that Rhea had spent 20 minutes in a room I wasn't in, defending our positioning line by line against a pointed round of questions Helena's board had lobbed her way, never once mentioning that half the language in question had been mine. She kept saying, "We?" Miles told me, bewildered, like he'd never seen Rhea share credit with anyone in the 4 years he'd known her. Every sentence. We found this. We? Believe this. I don't think I've heard her say. We. In a meeting in my entire career. I didn't say anything to her about it. I didn't have to. I just found her in the hallway afterward and squeezed her hand once, quick, and she looked at me like that was somehow more than a compliment would have been. It caught up with me an hour later, in the narrow service hallway behind the ballroom where the staff kept the linen carts, a stretch of hotel most guests never saw, bare concrete under fluorescent light, none of the polish of the rest of the resort. I'd gone back there looking for a supply closet with spare extension cords for the projector, and instead, I found myself sitting down hard on an overturned crate, hands pressed to my face, everything I'd been holding together for 2 days, finally giving out at once, the lost luggage. Vanessa's voice in my ear, the particular exhaustion of being brilliant and composed in front of a client, while something enormous and unnamed kept happening to me every time Rhea Montgomery looked at me a certain way. I wasn't crying exactly, I was just breathing like someone who badly needed to. I didn't hear her come in. I only noticed when a shadow fell across the concrete, and Rhea crouched down in front of me, not touching me, not saying anything performative or reassuring, just present, patient, giving me the exact amount of space I needed without making me ask for it. You don't have to talk, she said, after a while. I'm just going to sit here until you're ready to stand back up. I'm fine. You're allowed to not be fine. I've just never seen you let yourself do it where anyone could see. She settled onto the concrete floor across from me, ruining a very expensive pair of trousers without seeming to notice or care. For what it's worth, this account, this pitch, all of it, none of it matters more than you actually being okay. I know that's not how either of us was trained to think. I'm trying to unlearn it too. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, finally, my voice smaller than I liked. The thing where someone sees all of it, the tired parts, the scared parts. I've spent so long being the person who handles everyone else's crisis that I forgot what it's like to have someone handle mine. You don't have to know how yet, she said. You just have to let me stay while you figure it out. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't offer solutions or reschedule my afternoon or tell me to pull it together for the client. She just stayed, cross-legged on cold concrete in a hallway no one else would ever see, until my breathing evened out and some of the weight lifted, and when I finally stood, she stood with me, straightened my blazer without being asked, and said, "Better?" in a voice so gentle it undid me nearly as much as the breakdown had. "Better?" I said, and meant it. The elevator stalled between the third and fourth floors just after 6, the lights dimming to their emergency setting, a small chime announcing a maintenance delay that the concierge, when Rhea called down, promised would be resolved within 20 minutes. "Of course," I said, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor, because my feet had been in heels for 11 hours, and dignity had its limits. Of course this is happening. Rhea sat down across from me, close enough in the small space that our knees nearly touched. "Could be worse." "How?" "We could be stuck in here with Vanessa." I laughed despite myself, and she smiled at the sound of it like she'd been fishing for exactly that. The emergency light cast everything in a soft amber, and in the quiet I could hear both of our breathing, and it felt, suddenly, unbearably intimate. No laptop between us, no deck to hide behind, just the two of us and 20 minutes and 2 years of pretending we didn't notice each other. "Can I ask you something?" I said, "and you don't get to deflect with a joke." "That's a big ask for me." "I know." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, like she was bracing for it. "Do you actually not like me?" I asked. "Or is that just easier than the alternative?" Something moved behind her eyes, fast, like a door opening and shutting, before I could see what was on the other side of it. "Cassidy." "You don't have to answer." "I want to." She looked down at her hands, then back up, and for once, there was no smirk anywhere on her face. "I've spent 2 years pushing you because you're the only person at that agency who ever pushed back. Everyone else just agrees with me or resents me. You do neither. You fight me on the merits, every time, and you're usually half right, and it's—" She exhaled, short and frustrated with herself. "It's the most alive I feel all week, most weeks. That's not dislike. I don't know what to call it, but it's not that." 2 years of derivative decks, I said, half laughing, half something else. And this is the closest either of us has come to admitting there was ever anything else going on. "I've admitted plenty," Rhea said. "I told you I check the exits you check. I told you I know your coffee order. I told you that you're the most alive I feel all week. I have been extremely obvious, Cassidy, for a woman who is supposedly known for never losing a pitch. I thought that was just how you talk to everyone." "I have never once memorized anyone else's coffee order," she said, with the particular dry precision that meant she was completely serious underneath the joke. "I don't even know Miles's, and I've worked with him for 4 years. The elevator light flickered, and somewhere above us the mechanism groaned back to life, and the doors would open in 90 seconds and this moment would be over, and I understood, with sudden clarity, that I did not want it to be. "Rhea." "Don't," she said, gently, before I could finish. "Not here. Not with 20 minutes and an audience of cameras and a pitch tomorrow that we cannot afford to lose our minds over tonight." She was right, and I hated that she was right, and the doors opened onto the 3rd floor before I could argue, and the moment folded itself away like something we'd both agreed to come back for later. By the time the pitch materials were finally, mercifully rebuilt and rehearsed twice over, It was past 9, and Rhea suggested the pool the way she suggested everything. Like it wasn't a suggestion at all, just a fact she'd already decided about both of us. The resort has an indoor pool, empty this time of night. I checked. You checked? I like knowing my options, she said, which I was starting to understand was Rhea for. I wanted an excuse to keep being near you, and this was the least embarrassing one I could find. The pool corridor was warm and blue-lit and smelled like chlorine and eucalyptus. The water so still it looked solid, steam curling off the surface into the cooler air near the windows. We didn't swim. We sat at the edge with our feet in the water, work clothes traded for the resort robes hanging in the closet, and for a while neither of us said much, just watched the snow fall against the glass on the far wall, lit gold from the pool lights below. Rhea's phone buzzed against the tile. She glanced at it, and something in her face went carefully blank in the specific way I now recognized as her deciding not to feel something in front of me. You can take it, I said. I don't have to. You also don't have to pretend it's nothing. She held my gaze for a second, like she was recalibrating something, and then she picked up the phone and walked a few steps down the corridor. Low murmured half of a conversation I could hear the shape of, but not the words. I watched her spine go rigid. I watched her jaw work the way it did before she delivered a line in a pitch room that she'd rehearsed, until it didn't sound rehearsed at all. When she came back, her face had that same scraped flat quality Devs had gotten over the lost reservation, like she was holding something together through sheer professional habit. My mother, she said. She saw a photo Miles posted of the trip, asked if I was still playing at advertising, or if I'd found something real to do yet. She laughed, short and humorless, and sat back down at the pool's edge, closer to me than before, like she needed the warmth of another person nearby, even if she wasn't ready to say so. I run strategy for accounts worth more than her house. It's never enough. It was never going to be enough. That's not true. What she thinks isn't... I know what it's not, she said, sharper than she meant to, and then, softer, immediately sorry for the edge in her own voice. Sorry, I don't do this. The talking about it thing. I noticed. You noticed a lot of things this week. You're not subtle when you're tired, I said, and she almost smiled. I didn't reach for her hand. Not yet. But I let my shoulder rest against hers, solid and unhurried, and felt some of the tension go out of her by degrees, like a held breath finally released. She used to say I only ever wanted to win because I was afraid of what happened if I didn't, Rhea said, quieter, to the water, instead of to me. She wasn't wrong. I just don't think she meant it kindly. For what it's worth, I said, I don't think you fight for things because you're afraid. I think you fight for things because you actually care whether they're done right. And somewhere along the way, somebody taught you that caring wasn't allowed to look soft, so it turned into winning instead. That's not the same thing as being afraid. That's just being lonely about it. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she looked at me, there was something raw in her expression that she usually kept locked several floors below the surface. That is an uncomfortably accurate thing to say to someone at 11 o'clock at night. I contain multitudes, I said, echoing her from the cafe, and she laughed, really laughed, the sound bouncing softly off the tile, and leaned her head against my shoulder, for exactly as long as either of us could pretend it was casual, which was longer than either of us expected. I wanted, badly, in that moment, to close the last of the distance between us and put my hand against her jaw and tell her that her mother was wrong about her in every measurable way. I didn't. It wasn't the right moment yet. Not quite. And some part of me, the part still guarded from the last time I'd loved someone at work and lost my whole sense of myself along with her, was still, quietly, terrified. But I let her stay against my shoulder until the water went still and the snow kept falling, and neither of us mentioned, out loud, how much it had started to feel like something we were both choosing. We found our way up to the rooftop terrace an hour later, both of us too wired to sleep, snow still falling but gentler now, the storm losing its nerve. The lake stretched out dark and endless below the string lights someone had left on through the season. Rhea stood at the railing with her coat open, unbothered by the cold in the way people are when they've decided the cold is the least of their problems. 2 years, she said, not looking at me. I've spent 2 years telling myself the reason I think about you is that you're good competition. And the real reason? She turned, finally, and the terrace lights caught the snow in her hair, and she looked at me the way she'd looked at that bed on the first night, like something she'd already decided about and was only waiting for me to catch up to, patient in the particular way she was patient about pitches she already knew she'd win. You know the real reason, she said. I stepped closer, close enough that I could see her breath in the cold air, close enough that the space between us stopped being professional distance and became something else entirely. Her perfume had faded over the long day into something quieter, warmer, more her than the version she wore into pitch rooms, and I found myself cataloging it the way she'd apparently been cataloging my coffee order for 2 years, filing it away somewhere I wouldn't be able to unlearn it later. Say it anyway. Cassidy. My name again, low, and this time it wasn't fond. It was something closer to a confession she hadn't decided to make yet. Her eyes dropped, briefly, to my mouth, and came back up like she'd caught herself doing something she wasn't allowed to do. If I say it here, on a rooftop, in the middle of a business trip, I'm going to spend the rest of this pitch unable to look at you across a table, without everyone in the room knowing exactly what I meant by it. Maybe I want everyone to know. Cassidy. A phone rang, hers, shattering, and she swore under her breath and answered it. Because it was Miles. Because it was always Miles. Because the universe apparently had a sense of humor about exactly how long it would let us stand on the edge of something before yanking us back. By the time the call ended, a materials crisis, resolved in 10 minutes but stretched to 20 by anxiety, the moment had gone cold along with the terrace air, and we went back inside without either of us saying the thing we'd both nearly said. I couldn't sleep after the terrace. I lay on my side of the invisible line we'd stopped taking seriously days ago, listening to Rhea breathe in the dark 2 feet away, replaying the way she'd looked at my mouth before she caught herself, until I couldn't stand the silence anymore and got up, restless, and went to get ice from the machine down the hall for no reason except that I needed to move. She followed me. Of course she followed me. Some things had apparently stopped being negotiable between us without either of us voting on it. It happened, in the end, in the hallway outside our room, at 11 at night, after a day that had worn both of us down to something unguarded, the ice bucket abandoned somewhere near my feet, forgotten the second she said my name. You do this, I said, not sure where the anger was coming from, except that it was easier than the alternative. You get close, and then you pull the ripcord. The elevator, the terrace. Every time it matters, you turn it into a joke, or a phone call, or a smirk, like none of it's real. That's not fair. Isn't it? You said I was the most alive you feel all week, and then you let Miles interrupt us and didn't say another word about it. What am I supposed to think, Rhea? That this is a game to you? That I'm just the only opponent left worth playing against? You were never a game to me. Her voice cracked on the last word, all the careful control gone out of it at once, and I watched her decide, right there in the hallway, to stop hiding. Do you have any idea what it's like to be the person everyone wants because of what I can do for them? Nobody wants Rhea. They want the win. And then you show up, and you fight me on the merits, and you call my deck derivative to my face, and you notice when I'm tired, and it terrified me, because for the first time in years, someone wanted the actual person, and I didn't know what to do with that except turn it into rivalry, because rivalry, I understand. Rivalry doesn't leave. The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere behind a door, a television murmured. Rhea stood a foot away from me, breathing hard, having said more true things in 30 seconds than I'd heard her say in 2 years, and I understood, finally, that the smirk had never been cruelty. It had been armor, exactly the way my carefulness was armor, 2 guarded people circling the same thing from opposite directions. Can I kiss you? She said, low, none of the performance left in her voice at all. I need you to actually decide, not the storm deciding it, not the bed, not the adrenaline, you. Yes, I said, and meant it more than I'd meant almost anything in years. She closed the distance slowly, giving me every chance to change my mind, and I didn't. And when her mouth finally met mine, it wasn't careful at all. It was 2 years of pretending breaking open at once, her hand coming up to my jaw, mine fisting in the front of her coat, like I needed something to hold on to, both of us breathing like we'd been running. She tasted like the coffee I'd watched her drink black all day out of some misplaced professional pride, and when we finally broke apart, foreheads still touching, she laughed, unsteady and real. "So," she said, "not nervous?" "Terrified," I admitted. "Different thing entirely." We didn't sleep on opposite sides of any invisible line that night, but we also didn't let it become more than it was. A long, slow, breathless kind of closeness, her hand tracing patterns against my back, until we both drifted off tangled together. And in the morning, neither of us mentioned it out loud, because the pitch was in 6 hours, and Helena Cross did not care about our feelings, and some part of both of us was already afraid of what came after the storm ended. The morning of the pitch, Rhea handed me a coffee before I'd even fully opened my eyes, the cup already marked with a faint press of her lipstick from where she'd taken a sip to test the temperature first. An old habit she said she couldn't break. She caught me looking at the mark and didn't apologize for it, just watched me drink from the same spot, like it meant something she wasn't ready to name out loud yet. "Nervous?" she asked, buttoning the cuffs of a blazer so sharply tailored it looked like armor, which I supposed, in a way, it was. "Terrified," I said. "You?" "Always. I've just gotten very good at hiding it." She studied me in the mirror for a second, then turned, and something softened in her face. "Not from you anymore, though. I'd like that to be true, at least for today." I set my coffee down, crossed the room, and straightened her collar for her, an excuse to touch her more than an actual wardrobe correction, and she let me, watching my face the whole time like she was memorizing it for later. "For what it's worth," I said, "I don't need you to hide anything from me anymore. Not the nerves, not the mother, not the version of you that isn't sure she's going to win. I like all of them." "That," Rhea said, "might be the single most dangerous thing anyone has ever said to me before, a 7-figure pitch." "Good," I said. "Go be brilliant. I'll be right behind you, the way I always am, whether either of us wants to admit that out loud in front of Miles, who is currently pacing the hallway outside our door for reasons neither of us has the energy to investigate this early in the morning." The ballroom, when we finally stood in it that afternoon, was all glass and gold light, the storm having burned itself out overnight into a hard, clean blue sky over the lake. Helena Cross sat at the center of a long table, with her arms crossed, flanked by 2 board members, and, 3 seats down, Vanessa Crane, smiling like she already knew how this would go. Rhea and I had rebuilt the opening the night before, after the kiss, at 2 in the morning, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a single tablet between us, trading sentences back and forth until neither of us could tell whose idea had started where, and it was better than either version we'd had before, because it wasn't Rhea's strategy wrapped around my emotional core anymore. It was one thing, built by 2 people who had finally stopped competing long enough to actually listen to each other. "Luxury," Rhea began, standing at the head of the table with a calm I recognized now as something she built on purpose, brick by brick, "isn't about perfection. Ask anyone who's stayed in a 5-star hotel and remembers nothing about it a year later. What people remember is being seen. Being known well enough that someone gets your coffee order right without asking. That's not a marketing line. That's the entire architecture of loyalty." She glanced at me, once, brief and warm, and I picked up exactly where she left off, the way we'd practiced and also the way we hadn't, the way that only happened when 2 people trusted each other enough to hand off a sentence mid-thought. "We got snowed in here 2 nights ago," I said, and heard Vanessa's chair shift slightly, sensing an opening she wasn't going to get. Lost reservation, no materials, one of the worst travel days of my career, and the thing that saved it wasn't a system or a script. It was a person who noticed I take my coffee with sugar and never tells anyone. That's what your brand can be. Not flawless. Attentive. The kind of place people trust with the parts of themselves they don't advertise. Helena Cross was quiet for a long moment, tapping one manicured nail against the table, and then she looked at Vanessa, whose smile had gone slightly fixed, and said, "Ms. Crane's deck was very polished." This was the first pitch all week that told me the truth about what I'm actually selling. Vanessa recovered fast, the way people like her always did. "It's sweet," she said, light and pointed, looking between Rhea and me with an expression that made my skin prickle. "How close you two clearly are. Almost makes me wonder if the account's the only thing you're fighting to win this week." The room went very still. Miles's face did something complicated. I felt Rhea go rigid beside me, ready to defend me the way she always was, and I put a hand briefly on her arm, not pulling her back, just letting her know she didn't have to carry this alone. "We're colleagues who respect each other enough to fight for the best idea instead of our own egos," I said, meeting Vanessa's eyes and not blinking. "I'd think that's exactly the kind of partnership Ms. Cross is looking for." "I'm not sure why it would concern you, unless your team doesn't have one." Helena Cross made a sound that might, from a less formidable woman, have been called a laugh. "I like her," she said to Rhea, like I wasn't standing right there. "You should keep her." We won the account that afternoon. Miles cried a little in the elevator, which none of us mentioned again. Rhea squeezed my hand once, quick and hidden between our coats, and it felt like more than the kiss had, somehow, a promise made in public where no one but us could see it. That night, our last at the resort, we packed slowly, in no hurry to leave the room that had started all of it. And somewhere between folding sweaters and arguing gently over whose charger belonged to whom, Rhea pulled me down onto the edge of the bed and kissed me until neither of us was thinking about suitcases at all. "I don't want to go back and have this be a thing that happened at a hotel," she said, quiet, against my temple. "I want it to be a thing that keeps happening." "It will," I told her, and believed it completely, the way you believe things at midnight in a room that still smells like someone else's soap and your own perfume tangled together. The flight home the next morning was delayed twice and then finally boarded, and we sat pressed together in economy, her head on my shoulder somewhere over Ohio, and I remember thinking, with a kind of dumb, unguarded happiness, that I could get used to this. I didn't know yet how fast a city could talk you out of something a storm had made feel so certain. Chicago, when we landed back into it, was gray and ordinary, and entirely too far from a lakeside storm that had rearranged something fundamental in both of us. My apartment felt strange that first night alone. Too quiet, too square, none of the storm hush intimacy of the suite we'd shared for 4 days. I found myself standing in my own kitchen at 11, missing the sound of someone else breathing nearby, and told myself that was a ridiculous thing to feel about a coworker after one trip, and didn't believe myself even a little. The agency welcomed us back as conquering heroes, Miles telling the story of the pitch in increasingly dramatic terms at every meeting, and somewhere in the noise of congratulations, Rhea and I quietly, carefully, began pulling away from each other. It wasn't a decision either of us made out loud. It was smaller than that, an extra beat of distance in the hallway, meetings where we sat at opposite ends of the table again, instead of the shared edge we'd found on the trip, a return to the rules we'd made up in that hotel room, except now they weren't funny anymore. They were just walls. In a Monday strategy review, Rhea presented a media plan with the same crisp confidence she always had, and when I offered a note on the framing, she said, "Noted," instead of arguing with me the way she used to, the way I'd learned to love, and something in my chest ached at the loss of it, small and stupid and enormous all at once. We ended up alone in a supply closet of an elevator 2 days later, not stalled, just briefly empty of anyone else. 6 floors of silence neither of us knew how to fill. She stood near the panel of buttons, I stood near the mirrored wall, and the space between us, which had once felt charged enough to set off the fire alarm, now just felt like a held breath neither of us knew how to release. "How was your weekend?" she asked, purely because someone had to say something. "Fine," I said. "Yours?" "Fine," she said, and we rode the rest of the way down in a silence so polite it hurt more than any argument we'd ever had. And when the doors opened onto the lobby, she stepped out first, quickly, like she couldn't get away fast enough. And I stood there for a second longer than I needed to, watching her walk away in heels I now knew she'd bought specifically because they didn't pinch after 12 hours on her feet. a fact I had no right to know and couldn't unknow, and understood that if this kept up much longer, I was going to lose something I hadn't even let myself have yet. I overheard the thing that broke it 3 days after we got back, standing outside Miles's office with a coffee I didn't drink, waiting to talk to him about the cross account's next phase. The door was open a crack. Nothing happened, Rhea was saying, flat, careful, professional, in a way that hollowed something out of my chest. It was a stressful trip. We're colleagues. I wouldn't want anyone getting the wrong idea about either of us. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I walked away fast, coffee cooling in my hand, past the rows of desks where people I'd worked alongside for years were laughing about something on someone's monitor. Ordinary Tuesday sounds that suddenly felt very far away, like I was watching my own office through glass. I told myself I wasn't hurt, and I was lying, the way I'd been lying about a lot of things where Rhea was concerned. It landed exactly where the old wound already was, worn smooth from the last time, and it didn't even have to try very hard to reopen it. I didn't know, not then, that Miles had heard a rumor from an intern who'd seen us on the terrace, and that Rhea had spent that entire conversation protecting my reputation specifically, because she knew, because I'd told her, in a quiet hallway moment on the trip, about the last time I'd loved someone at work, and how it had cost me 2 years of people looking at me sideways in meetings, wondering if I'd earned my seat or been given it. She was trying to make sure that never happened to me again. She just hadn't told me she was doing it, and so all I heard was, "Nothing happened." And all I felt was the exact shape of every old wound reopening at once. I went cold. Not cruel. I was never cruel. Just careful. In the old way. The pre-Rhea way. Professional and distant and unreachable. And she noticed within a day, because noticing me had apparently become her full-time occupation too. "You're doing the thing," she said, cornering me gently by the printer on a Thursday, echoing her own words back at herself without meaning to. The quiet thing. "I'm just busy. Cassidy." She glanced down the hallway to make sure it was empty, lowered her voice. "This is me asking. Actually asking. Not performing asking. What did I do?" "I heard you," I said, before I could stop myself. "Outside Miles's office." "Nothing happened." "I heard you." Something in her face fell, entirely. The mask gone in an instant. "That's not... I was protecting you." Miles heard a rumor, and I panicked. I didn't want it following you around the office the way... You told me what happened last time. I didn't want that for you. I would never... You could have told me you were doing that, instead of letting me find out standing outside a door. "I know." She said it quietly. No defense in it at all. "I'm sorry. I'm still learning how to do this without it turning into strategy. I've spent so long protecting myself by controlling every room I walk into, and I did the same thing to protect you, and I forgot that protecting someone and shutting them out can look exactly the same from the outside." I didn't have an answer for that yet. I walked away, and for 2 weeks we orbited each other at a careful, painful distance, professional and correct and entirely wrong. I got very good in those 2 weeks at pretending to read emails I wasn't reading, at finding reasons to take the stairs instead of the elevator, at telling Daphne over the phone every night that I was fine, in a voice that convinced neither of us. Daphne found me on a Friday night, 3 glasses of wine into a conversation I hadn't meant to have, sitting on my apartment floor with a takeout container I'd stopped eating from an hour ago, the city lights coming up soft and orange through the window behind me. Nothing at all like the white-out hush of a snowbound resort 1,000 miles away. "You've been a ghost for 2 weeks," she said, letting herself in with the spare key I'd given her 2 apartments ago and never taken back, settling down across from me on the floor with her own glass, the particular gentleness in her voice that meant she wasn't going to let me deflect. "And don't tell me it's the workload, because I've seen your workload, and this isn't that. This is Rhea. It's complicated." "It's not, actually. That's the thing." Daphne pulled her knees up, studied me with the clear-eyed honesty of the one person at that agency who'd never once played games with me. "You're not scared she'll hurt you because she's careless, Cass. You know she's not careless. You're scared because she might actually stay. That's a very different fear, and you've been running the same play against it that you ran the last time. Except this time, the guy who broke your heart is gone, and you're doing it to yourself. I didn't say anything for a long time. She stood in a ballroom in front of a client and defended you without blinking, Daphne said. She learned your coffee order without being asked. She lied to your boss to protect your reputation, badly, because she's apparently terrible at anything that isn't strategy when it comes to you, which honestly might be the most romantic thing I've ever heard in my life. What exactly are you protecting yourself from at this point? Being wrong again. Being wrong about someone who spent 2 years proving, in every measurable way, that she's not who the last guy was? Daphne shook her head. That's not caution, Cass. That's just fear wearing caution's coat. I turned my wine glass slowly on the floorboards, watching the light catch the edge of it. What if she decides I'm not worth the mess? The office talk, her mother, all of it. Then that's information you'll have, Daphne said, gentler now. But you don't get to skip the risk just because you already know how it feels to lose. You skip it. You also skip whatever this could actually turn into. I've watched you build an entire career out of being careful, Cass. I would just like to watch you be happy for a while too, if it's all the same to you. I didn't have an answer for that, not that night, but I didn't argue either, and Daphne stayed until the wine was gone and the takeout container had gone fully cold, and when she left, she hugged me at the door a beat longer than usual, like she knew I needed it, even though I hadn't asked. I stayed at the agency late the following Tuesday, alone in the open floor plan with the city lights coming up gold and blue through the windows. Working on a campaign board I didn't actually need to finish that night, because I needed somewhere to sit with everything Daphne had said. I heard the elevator ping around 9, and I knew before I turned around, the way you know, weather is coming before you see the clouds. Rhea stood at the edge of the room, coat still on, like she'd come straight from somewhere else and hadn't planned this at all, her hands doing the thing they did in pitch rooms right before a big number, that small, contained restlessness she thought no one else noticed. I noticed. I always noticed. I wasn't going to keep pretending this was fine, she said. No smirk anywhere on her. No armor left that I could find. I've been in love with you slowly, and then all at once, and completely against every rule I ever made for myself about people at this office. And I need you to know that the hotel bed was never a joke to me. I challenged you because it was easier than telling you I wanted to be close to you and had no idea how to say that out loud. I set my pen down. I thought you were ashamed of what happened. I was terrified of what would happen to you if it got out before you were ready, the way things fell apart for you last time, she said. I handled it badly. I know that. I would handle almost anything badly if it meant protecting you, and I'm working on understanding that protecting someone means telling them the truth, not managing it for them behind a closed door. I wasn't nervous about the bed either, I said, my voice catching in a way I didn't try to hide. I was nervous because some part of me already knew, that first night, that I could fall for you if I let myself. And I did. And then I got scared, the way I always get scared, and I built a wall instead of telling you. So we're both idiots. Spectacularly qualified idiots, Rhea said, and something in her voice cracked open into a laugh, even as her eyes were bright with something closer to tears than either of us was going to mention. I rehearsed this on the drive over, you know. I had 3 different versions. One where I stayed calm and professional about it. One where I made a joke so you couldn't see how much it mattered. And one where I just told you the truth and let you do whatever you wanted with it. Which one was this? None of them, she admitted. I got up here and every version I'd practiced just left. There's only ever been the true one where you're concerned. I don't know why I keep forgetting that. For what it's worth, I said, I like this version. No smirk, no armor, just you, standing in an empty office looking terrified. I am terrified, she said. I have been terrified since a hotel receptionist told us there was only one room, if we're being honest about the timeline. Very qualified idiots, I said again, softer this time, and she laughed, real and unguarded, crossing the floor to where I stood, and this time, neither of us waited for a storm, or an elevator, or a rooftop to force the moment. She reached up and touched my jaw, gentle, asking without asking, and I closed the last of the distance myself. The kiss was slower this time, no adrenaline underneath it, no deadline pressing us forward, Just two people who'd finally stopped treating honesty like a liability, choosing each other in an empty office at 9 at night, with the whole quiet city spread out gold below us. "We're going to have to actually figure out how this works," I said, against her mouth, laughing a little. "Boundaries. Rules that aren't about pillow walls." "I'm excellent at negotiating terms," she said. "It's sort of my whole job." "We don't hide behind rivalry anymore. Real rule." "Real rule," she agreed. "Although I reserve the right to still call your third headline draft derivative if it's derivative. And I reserve the right to be right about it." "Deal," she said, and kissed me again to seal it. And for the first time in 2 years, the space between Rhea Montgomery and me stopped feeling like a battlefield and started feeling like something closer to home. 8 months later, we flew back to the same lakeside resort to celebrate the account's first renewal. This time by choice. No storm chasing us across 3 canceled flights. No crisis waiting at the front desk. Helena Cross had personally requested we handle the account long-term. On the condition, she said dryly, that we kept doing whatever it was we were doing, because it worked. Miles had, in the intervening months, gotten used to the sight of us walking into meetings together, still arguing over headlines, still finishing each other's sentences in ways that occasionally alarmed the junior staff, and had stopped commenting on it entirely, except for one memorable afternoon when he'd sighed and said, "I don't know when you two stopped being a problem and started being my best team, but please don't ever tell me the story," and neither of us had. The drive up from the airport was easy this time. Dry roads, a sky so clear it looked freshly washed, the lake a flat, brilliant blue instead of the pewter it had been the last time we'd seen it. Daphne had made me promise to bring back a full report, and Rhea had rolled her eyes and said some things should stay between the two of us, and I had privately agreed with both of them. The lobby, when we walked in, smelled like cedar and cut flowers instead of wet wool. No crowd of stranded travelers, no crying stranger on the phone, no Dev with his wide, glassy, apologetic eyes. Someone had put out a bowl of clementines near the check-in desk. It was, I thought, an almost offensively pleasant place to be, now that neither of us was arriving exhausted and furious, and one bad conversation away from unraveling. The receptionist, a different one this time, older, unbothered, handed over the key with a pleasant smile. "Junior suite, 2 queen beds, per your request." "We didn't request 2 beds," I said. "Huh," the receptionist said, already looking past us toward the next guest in line, entirely unaware she was standing in the middle of a full-circle moment neither of us had planned. System glitch, maybe. Happens more than you'd think, this time of year. Rhea checked the confirmation on her phone, then looked up at me with an expression I would have recognized anywhere, on any night, in any hotel lobby in the world. The same slow, deliberate patience she'd had that first evening, coat still buttoned, entirely unbothered by chaos she seemed to have been waiting for. "Unless you're nervous," she said. I looked at her, steadier now, easier in her own skin, still sharp enough to make my heart trip in meetings when she cut straight to the point of something I'd been circling for an hour, still competitive enough to argue with me in the rental car about which one of us had actually saved that first pitch, and to lose that argument gracefully, for once, somewhere around the state line, and I felt none of the old fear at all, only the warm, settled certainty of a decision I'd make again every single time. "Not even a little," I said, and reached for 1 key card instead of 2. Upstairs, the room was smaller than the suite had been, plainer, 2 queen beds standing a few feet apart with a nightstand and a lamp between them. Exactly the kind of arrangement the old version of me would have accepted with relief. Rhea set her bag down at the foot of the bed nearest the window, the same as always, and looked at the second bed with mild, theatrical disdain. "We could keep it," she said, "for appearances, in case Miles ever asks." Miles is never going to ask. Miles cried in an elevator over a hotel account. I wouldn't put anything past that man. She crossed to where I stood, unhurried, and slid her arms around my waist like it was the easiest thing in the world, which, by now, it was. For the record, I liked the version of us that fought about the bed, but I like this version better. "Which version is this?" "The one where you don't have to dare me into anything," she said, against my temple. "You just get to want it. Out loud, every time. Outside, the lake had gone perfectly still under a sky scrubbed clean of storm, and there was no crisis waiting downstairs, no client to save, no rival watching from 3 seats down, nothing at all standing between us and the rest of a very ordinary, very undramatic evening together, which felt, after everything, like the most romantic thing either of us had ever won. We pushed the second bed's blanket over anyway, out of habit, and fell asleep tangled together in the one we'd chosen. And outside the window, for once, there was no storm left to hide behind at all. Only us. Choosing this, the way we'd choose it again tomorrow, and the day after that, for as long as either of us got a say in it.